So what the charge that I have was actually given to me by Kai, because this panel sort of grew out of the conservation panel that he and Angela organized. And the question for me was, what do teachers owe students who want to work at the interface? And I'm gonna take a quick moment to background all this, my comments, because I co-teach this class that I've mentioned a couple times at the University of Arizona called Connecting Environmental Science and Decision Making, and I co-teach it with my colleague Connie Woodhouse. So I'm a human geographer, I'm a social scientist, and Connie's a paleoclimate researcher, so she's a full-on physical scientist. So that co-teaching model sort of encodes in the design of the class even that interdisciplinary work is the thing we're talking about. I've learned a lot. We've been teaching that class for 6 years continuously. We only teach it once a year. It draws students from across colleges and departments on campus. I started with one of my colleagues, I started studying them a few years ago. So we have some data about these people, and we've asked them some fairly specific questions. And so one thing from that data, we're just analyzing 3 years of data, and we're about to publish something. But one thing that's relevant, I think, for this conversation is at this point, we're attracting primarily 50% of the students are PhD students. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. So this is 50% of people coming to the University of Arizona, which I should say is it's a Research One university, has very good science programs to train graduate students. So 50% of our folks are getting PhDs. We ask them, what's your ideal career objective? And we've done pre and post. As they come in, we ask them, and as they leave the seminar, we ask them. For this particular question, it doesn't move much. But they're coming in, and we get them, you can choose any of these options. So this is a select all kind of question. 69% of the people that are coming to the class are saying, and again, remember, 50% of these people are PhDs, they want to go work for an NGO. 62% say they want to do research outside of academia. 46% of them say they want to work in resource management. 41% say tenure track. So we're not getting a huge, and a lot of people are checking like a bunch of them, and in the comments, there's a comment section, they're falling, tenure track is their fallback position. So as someone mentioned the other day, I think it was Maria mentioned, the opportunity for tenure track jobs are very limited anyway, so we are overtraining. So to Carrie's point, we do have a lot of supply to work with. So that's the background for all of these comments I'm about to make, which is that I teach this seminar. It is attracting people who don't necessarily want to go be faculty members, and they do want to go do good in the world, and Carrie is an exemplar of that. So to the question, like, what do we owe students who want to work in the science policy interface? I mean, in some way, we owe them the exact same thing we owe every other student at a big university like the one I work at, which is, we need to ground them in scholarship. We need to try to give them some experience. We owe them mentoring. In thinking about this, which I've been thinking about for a long time, I think the additional things we owe them are different maybe than other fields. And these are things like an honest assessment of the failure of higher education to deliver, what they're going to need for their career if they really want to work in this field. And Carrie just illustrated that nicely. I think we owe them a substantially less hierarchical approach to training and mentoring. I think what I'm finding with students that I am now mentoring is I am not qualified to mentor their entire PhD dissertation. I'm on Carrie's dissertation. I'm a late addition to Carrie's PhD dissertation committee. I am not qualified to evaluate the atmospheric science as part of it. I'm not. Mercifully, she has an outstanding atmospheric scientist who is, but I'm the other part. And that's a different role. There's a lot of ego in academia, and I'm perfectly happy to say I don't know how to evaluate part of this stuff. So we have to own that we can't be so hierarchical in our training and mentoring. I think we owe students the honesty about the reality, which is we have to give you the opportunity to fail as a graduate student. We have to put you in an environment where you might not actually succeed, because that is the reality of working in this space. And then actually the last thing I added this morning, after a conversation with Tanya last night, she put it in the front of my mind that had been in the back of my mind. I think we need to make sure that we're getting students who are going to do this kind of work. We have to acknowledge to them, frankly, that this work is political. It's in a political environment. I mean, the whole idea of the interface is between science and basically politics. Thank you. And I think we have to acknowledge that. And I think we have to not hide behind the old scheme of we're objective and we're scientists and whatever. I'm allergic to politics. It's not true. So if we go down that path, the reasoning is if you say that we're working in a political environment, what does that mean? Well, that means all the power dynamics that are endemic in politics are going to be present. We've talked around this quite a bit here, but we haven't necessarily hit it head on. Kathy brought it up earlier, though. And I think if we go to the next step, all those power dynamics means we have endemic biases that are present, right? And that means we have skewed distributions of gender and race and class and status in all these institutions, in universities, in decision-making bodies. And so why would a student need to know this? Because you are going to be working in this world. If you are of a certain class, if you're of a certain gender, if you're of a certain race or status within a hierarchy like a university, it makes a difference. So we don't talk about that enough. And I think it's an interesting thing to, the intervention point we have when we're training students. You don't want to scare people off, right? But on the other hand, you also don't want to send people into the world saying, woohoo, this is going to be awesome, without some eye-opening about it is awesome. And it's an incredibly satisfying field to work in, but it has this sort of feature about it. So I'm going to say just a couple things about the sort of traditional things that we owe students, which is grounding them in scholarship, giving them some experience, and then some mentoring. And I guess the main thing I'm going to hit on is from that work I've done looking at these graduate students who take our seminar. And I should say we have other students we're surveying at the same time, because CLEMIS has several ways we intervene with students, including a fellowship program and our own GRAs. So this is just reflecting the seminar that I teach. In terms of grounding in scholarship, I think Jim said, maybe even in his introduction, thank you, Adam, that we don't want to reinvent the wheel, that there's a lot known about this field, working at the interface of science and policy. There's actually quite a bit of scholarship about it. I get how impenetrable some of it is for practitioners. To that exact point, though, grounding people in that scholarship, I have found now, and I have gotten feedback through the surveying we're doing, is key. And so what we found when we asked students, it's quite surprising to Connie and I, we asked students, what are the two things, what are the things you think you're going to learn before the seminar starts? What are the things you actually learned afterwards? And wow, we aren't doing what we thought we were doing. But aside from that, what we turn out to be doing is teaching a lot about the theory and all this scholarship that's been alluded to here. The idea of boundary organizations, the idea of boundary objects. And yes, these are semantic terms and they're academic wankery on some level, but they are also incredibly useful concepts because, again, remember, we're training people who aren't just going to be faculty members. In fact, probably the minority are going to be faculty members. We're training people who are going to be working in the real world, who are planners and who are resource managers and so forth. So in our context, grounding in scholarship tends to mean this. It tends to mean training people in these concepts and these ideas. And I do think what is happening is, from the comments that we get about this, is that people are coming in, some of these concepts seem very intuitive, like, oh, the words mean something, and then you start reading about it and you're thinking more deeply about it, because it is really deep scholarship. You're like, oh, and it really deepens your experience and your understanding, just like any other scholarship does. So there's that. So we're grounding people in scholarship. I think we owe them that. If you're going to go into this world, you should probably understand some of these concepts because they are incredibly useful once you get through the academic wankery. The practical experience question is pretty interesting because we are in this liminal zone, basically, in this interface. And I think that the practical experience that Connie and I have been working with in our seminar has been recently, well, over the 6 years we've been doing it, has been much more focused on bringing in people like Ken, who, has been great about coming and visit our seminar and talking about his experience working for Central Arizona Project and talking to the CAP board, which is the elected board, and that whole stuff. We're thinking more and more now about actually much more grounded practical experience. Soliciting, there's a model from Europe, from the Dutch, called science shops, which is sort of a front door for science at universities. We're thinking more about that, soliciting from our colleagues as we work across the region, getting questions, basically, tough questions that are not really answerable, that could use some interdisciplinary science, and having our students work through those. So we're thinking about that. How do we get practical experience where I have to understand David, I have to understand Betts, I have to understand Carrie, and we have to solve the problem together. So I think that's one thing we really owe. And then in terms of mentoring, it's tough because you are in this position where, I am in this position where I'm not going to be an expert on all of the fields that, or in some of the specific, expertise, the deep dive, like, Carrie's an atmospheric scientist. So I think we just have to be broader in our thinking about how to mentor students who are going to do this work, because we have to acknowledge that they're going to know stuff we don't know. And that's tough in the hierarchy in which I work for a lot of people, because you have to be in charge. And it's kind of a stupid system, which many of us know, but it's an interesting way I'm put in an interesting position where I'm mentoring students, and in some cases they're looking to me in that hierarchical role, and I'm like, I don't know. We have to work together to figure out the answer to this, or find the person who knows the answer. Like, I don't really know. So it's a whole different kind of mentoring thing, or maybe I'm doing it wrong. I'm not sure. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I think that your points tie nicely to sort of the general trend about the kind of science and the kind of research done at the science policy interface, which is much more problem-based and solution-oriented. And I think there's a lot in terms of research on pedagogy that can help here too. So problem-based learning pedagogy, and all of those can be sources of, I think, information for designing any type of curriculum or anything around that. So I think that would be good for us to pay attention to as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I should say, we're trying to expand now. I've been diving into this literature because we're at the point of trying to expand this seminar, and we have a degree certificate. I won't belabor the point, but we're trying to expand it now into a program, which has forced us to go down the path of how would you teach this better?
I feel like the Lego movie. Like, I'm just so pumped up about all these sessions. So far, this has been fantastic, and I'm really excited for the next two, for Tanya and James to reflect on this. I think it's going to be fantastic. Your comment at the end about, or towards the end, about the scholarship, you know, people sort of, the general notion having meaning for them, and then sort of diving into it further and getting into the scholarship and realizing there's probably some deeper thinking that needs to inform the instinct, really resonated with me, and I think it sort of dovetails nicely with some of what Kai was trying to draw out yesterday about tacit knowledge. So it feels to me like you've thought through the education part, and thought through the mentoring part, or you're wrestling with that. Where does the risk-taking part come in? The idea that you're helping them take risks that then builds their experience.
It's a great question, and I think the Carrie actually illustrated. Is this thing on? Carrie actually illustrated in a way part of an answer. So when she found us, Clemus and me specifically, and I realized that we had this project where she would fit in really well. I put her in a vulnerable spot. I mean, she knew, we talked about it, but it didn't exactly fit into her PhD life. I mean, it really didn't. Fortunately, Shubin is a really good guy, and he bought in, basically, her advisor. But the risk-taking was, I didn't know this project. I mean, you never know with these RISA projects it could have just not worked. I mean, I think there was a point, and Kathy could speak to this too, because she's actually part of the project. I'm not actually part of that project directly. It could have failed. It could have been one of those things where you're like, they don't care. They don't care at all. And we had a good relationship with them through one of our colleagues and stuff. So, I mean, that was a sheltered way to do it, but it was a way to do it. I mean, in a way, the results that Carrie, the analysis that she did, it could have just been like, wow, that's uninteresting, which would have been horrible to put her into. But I think that's the way we've been doing it, is trying to get people experience.